afternoon, and welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I'm your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. Got a great program lined up for you today. Joining us once again on the program, Syracuse University professor Austin Kocher, going to be speaking with our Sandra Sanchez, South Texas correspondent, to talk about ICE detentions and the rising number of migrants dying in U.S. immigration and customs enforcement detention facilities. For those of you that don't know, Austin is an assistant research professor in the Office of Research and Creative Activity in the SI Newhouse of Public Communication at Syracuse University. He's also a faculty member with the Department of Geography at the Maxwell School and an affiliated expert at the Institute for Democracy, Journalism, and Citizenship, as well as a research fellow at American University's Center for Latin American and Latino Studies in the Immigration Lab. And there he is, joining us live now from our Washington, D.C. Bureau, Professor Austin Kocher. Thanks for joining us today, Professor.
Thanks for having me back on.
And so glad to hear that you're in D.C. and my alma mater, American University. We've talked about that before. We have that in common. Wanted to talk to you today about ICE detentions and deaths, specifically the 17th death recently on April 12th of a 27-year-old from Cuba who was held at a Miami facility in ICE detention. You've been tracking these numbers. Are these the highest numbers we've seen? What's the trend? What's going on, Austin?
Yes, this is the highest number of deaths we've seen. We're now seeing very predictably and very macabre fashion, one death every 6 days on average this year. Last year was tied with the highest number of deaths ever, but this year is on track to see 60 ICE detention deaths, which is the largest we've ever seen. And you know what's troubling, and I'm sure we're going to get into it, is there's a lot of questions about whether or not these deaths are preventable. But yes, we are definitely seeing the highest rate of detained deaths that we've ever seen.
So when you say they're on track for 60, is that just doing the math on average of how many they've had? Is that how you're kind of coming to that conclusion, or do you know something more?
No, that's right. It's just doing the basic math. And, you know, as someone who studies immigration enforcement and detention, it's uncommon to find patterns in the data that are quite as predictable as this right now. It's really been shocking. Over the past 3 months, that rate of one death every 6 days has held really common. In fact, while I was walking here to the studio to have this conversation with you, I was checking because, you know, based on the math, and you know, something would have to change radically, and the agency does not seem to be really, in my view, taking these deaths seriously enough to change some of these practices. You know, today or tomorrow we expect to hear, you know, sadly, another tragedy.
Actually, if you look at how the deaths occurred, the day of the 17th death occurred the day after the 16th death occurred, right? In Louisiana, it was a 49-year-old Mexican man at Wynn Correctional Center. So there were actually two right in a row. You mentioned ICE reporting the deaths. Are they reporting them in a timely manner, or are you having trouble getting that information and data?
So ICE is required by Congress to release information about these deaths within 48 hours, typically. There's several of the announcements have come out later than we would prefer, which means really we're finding out about them, and the families are finding out about them before ICE is reporting this to Congress in the timely fashion that they should be. However, the reports continue to come out. I think the more concerning thing is probably not so much just the delays, but the fact that the reports about the detained deaths have become shorter and less informative than they were in the past, which means ultimately the public and Congress itself just knows less. We have less information about what's going on and what led to these tragedies.
Yeah, some of the recent reports were like found in cell. You know, are we getting a lot of details exactly what happened to that person found in their cell?
Yes, that's right. And even when they provide some more information, there's been contradictory evidence that comes out after the fact, including there was a detained death at what we call Mountain East, which is a tent facility outside of an Army base near El Paso that was initially ruled as a suicide. Later, a coroner looked into it and found that it was very likely a homicide. That is, the person died as a result of some altercation, interaction with staff there at the facility. So we sort of have to take the information there in ICE's press release reports, but then follow up and really understand what all of the information around each case tells us, as opposed to just taking the surface level story that the agency provides.
Now, Austin, you have a Substack account and you have a lot of followers, and you are constantly having video chats and tons of information for viewers that you should hook up and join with Austin's Substack account, because it's really knowledgeable and a lot of good information gets out there. There was a graphic on your latest account that you gave us permission that we could pull up. I'm wondering if Rudy can put that up on the screen. Basically, the breakdown is 5 of the 17 deaths so far since January 1st. 5 were Mexican, 2 Cubans, 2 Hondurans, 2 Cambodians, Nicaraguan, and then 1 from each of these countries: Vietnam, Haiti, Iran, Guatemala, and Afghanistan. But 5 Mexicans. I mean, these are, and 2 Cambodians. These are a lot. If you look, here's the timeline. It's been put up. It's a little hard to see. Again, this is on your Substack account, and anyone can go there and sign up for it. But, I mean, we see these clusters of this happening. It also details 4 of these deaths were in Texas, and 3 in California, and 3 in Florida. So, I mean, what is going on here? Are the Texas deaths at spread out? Are they same facilities? Texas seems to have had 9 deaths since January of 2025, if we add last year in there, since the start of the second Trump administration, right?
Yeah, that's right. And we do, we see patterns. I'm always looking to see what the data tells us about what's happening and whether we can, infer some causal answers by looking at the data. I mean, the nationalities that you mentioned, it's what I always tell people and tell my students is the U.S. immigration system reflects the fact that there are folks in the country from all over the world, and certainly many from Mexico. So I think what we're seeing, unfortunately, is we're seeing that diversity reflected even in the most tragic sort of consequences of detention itself. I think there are some geographic patterns as well. The Adelanto facility in California has seen 4 deaths. I think it's the single most deaths at a facility. It might be tied for Mountain East outside of El Paso. As you said, Texas, with a lot of detention centers, has seen a corresponding large number of deaths, unfortunately. And what I think is maybe most important and most telling in the data is southern Florida, right around Miami. There's a concentration of detention facilities there. They sort of have the highest concentration of detained deaths right around that Miami area. And one of the things that tells me is that, when you see a high concentration of that, you really ask, I'm a geographer, I ask as a geographer, not only what's causing that in that region, is there some sort of unique lack of oversight in South Florida, but also where are elected representatives? Where are the congressional representatives and what are they doing since this is happening in their districts?
Yeah, let's go back to that Florida facility in Miami. The latest death in Miami actually was not at an ICE facility, though, right? It was a federal detention center in Miami, which is part of the Bureau of Prisons, basically a federal jail that holds for ICE. So explain to viewers, I mean, not everyone is sent to an ICE detention facility, correct?
Yeah, so ICE has a variety of different detention types, and the one in South Florida is pretty unique. There aren't a lot of them in the country, but it is a facility that's maintained by the Bureau of Prisons. Again, fairly unique in that regard. I think a lot of people probably imagine that the agency has its own facilities. It doesn't. There's most of the really large facilities in the country. It contracts out to private detention contractors. There are a few Bureau of Prisons, like the location of the recent detained death. And then there are tent cities or camps, actual camps like the one outside of El Paso. And of course, one of the things that's made the news recently is ICE's move to try to use warehouses, Amazon, shipping warehouses to hold people. They're not using that yet. And of course, they also use county jails in many places too. So ICE is used the agency has been very creative in how it tries to expand its detention logistical network to try to scale up to meet President Trump's mass deportation goals.
I'm curious, going back to the amount of information that's received or maybe not received from ICE on some of these unfortunate deaths. I mean, are we learning that maybe they're all occurring within the first 3 days of incarceration? Or, I know you said that as a geographer, you're always looking for these patterns. Do you get enough information like that to kind of put the dots together?
Sure, we certainly can look at information like that. I haven't seen that kind of pattern myself yet. If someone else has, I'd be very curious to know. But I haven't seen that kind of pattern myself. I mean, the pattern that's most important is really the time between the individual contacting medical support, nurses, and staff of the facility with medical complaints. A lot of people go into the facilities, for instance, not knowing that they may have a medical condition, and the conditions inside of detention, which are typically fairly poor. They don't get very good food. They don't get always enough food, just on a basic calorie level. The facilities are not always, sort of adequate for the volume of people that they're holding. So there might be someone who might be fine on the outside, but once they get inside the facility, the conditions exacerbate a medical condition they didn't know. There's also people who go into detention, Sandra, who have, let's say, type 1 or type 2 diabetes, and their medication is taken from them. They don't get that medication in time, and those conditions worsen. Some of the examples of things that we saw from some recent reporting looking very carefully at these cases is Luis Beltran Yanez Cruz was in detention and complained about feeling like he was suffocating, like couldn't breathe. And a nurse sent him back to his room and just said, hey, let us know if it gets worse. They didn't do any real evaluation or diagnostics. He died of a heart attack a day and a half later. So those are really the patterns I think that are most concerning.
Actually, here in 2023, we had the death of Anadith Reyes, the little girl who was born in Panama, and she had sickle cell anemia, and she had a heart condition, and she was in the CBP processing facility that in isolation for the flu with her mother here in Harlingen, Texas, where we actually are located. And her mother several times went to the medical facility and said, she can't breathe, she's having trouble. And they turned her back, and she eventually died. According to the lawsuit was just filed, she died in her mother's arms on her way back from the medical facility where she was rejected from. So I think that there was also recently a San Francisco Chronicle investigation, 6-month investigation, that you spoke to the reporters and found that 46 of the 46 deaths since the Trump administration, nearly half, 17, were concluded that doctors concluded that medical staff delayed or failed to provide critical care that might have saved the person's life, right?
Yes, that's right. When medical professionals look at the full story, they very often conclude that these deaths were exacerbated by the responses of facility staff, and basically are saying they were preventable. There was a study a few years ago by a number of immigrant rights organizations that found that over 90% of cases where they had enough data to review found that they were preventable. The San Francisco Chronicle's article recently basically extends and updates that work, I think, in a very sophisticated and defensible fashion, and finds something very similar. I think the issue that I want everyone to understand is, inside these facilities, the government does have a responsibility to provide adequate care and support to people in those facilities. Unfortunately, that infrastructure is not always there, and people who express medical complaints and concerns are not always taken seriously. And all I'm saying, from if I can take the research and turn it into public action, all I would say is no one should die over preventable illnesses inside of a detention facility, and we really have to find a way to make sure that if we are going to have detention, it shouldn't be deadly.
We're speaking with Syracuse University professor Austin Kocher about ICE detentions and the rising number of migrants dying inside ICE detention facilities. We're going to continue the conversation on the other side of a quick break, so stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 2 minutes. Welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. Joining us today, South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez, and our guest for today's program, Professor Austin Kocher.
Austin, we were talking about detention deaths. On Monday, there was a hunger strike that was reported at a Geo Group detention facility in North North Lake Processing Center, which is in Baldwin, Michigan. A group of men said that they refused to eat from multiple units there at the facility, citing dangerous conditions, a lack of adequate food and medical care, and cruel legal obstacles that have kept many in captivity with no end in sight. And that's according to a migrant advocacy group that sent that information out. Recently, on Saturday, we had a group caravan from Edinburgh to the Dilley Processing Facility, which is the Dilley Immigration Processing Center, formerly the South Texas Family Residential Center. Almost about 400 people showed up. The Democratic gubernatorial candidate, Gina Hinojosa, spoke to the crowd, and we had about 40 people, caravan and a couple dozen vehicles here from South Texas, about 4 hours up there. These are both for-profit facilities. The Dilley facility is owned by Core Civic. The one where the hunger strike is owned by the GEO Group. Tell us about these for-profit facilities. And I mean, is there enough oversight of them? Do you think that there is?
So the for-profit detention, industrial complex around immigration has been there since the 80s. It's most of detention has been private for a very long time. So it's sort of built into the infrastructure. But what we've seen recently is we've seen that system get worse. The oversight infrastructure and accountability mechanisms have been, all but entirely dismantled by this administration. The detention ombudsman, which used to be a source of oversight, that office has been gutted. The Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties has been gutted by the Trump administration. So, where detention has always been broken in many ways, and there's been hunger strikes. Over the last 20 years of my own work, I can remember lots of hunger strikes too. It's the poor conditions have been built into the system just because there's so much downward pressure. Since it is a for-profit business, you can make more money if you don't provide really good food and conditions. But things are getting worse. There's less oversight, and where in the past, if there were poor conditions or food, there was a complaint process. There was oversight. You could have a conversation with someone, and maybe the government would look into it and maybe fix those issues. So with the lack of infrastructure now, people are feeling increasingly, including people in detention, like they need to take that oversight and accountability into their own hands. And you can imagine, I'm writing about these detention deaths all the time, but, I'm sort of self-conscious about that because every time we talk about another detained death, it also is a reminder and a message to people inside of detention when they find out, that's really scary. And they're seeing these conditions and saying, under normal circumstances or under maybe previous administrations even, maybe they would go through the complaint process that existed, but now they're saying, look, either we have to fight for ourselves or one of us is going to die. That's the kind of fear. And, I'll just add on to this real quickly. We talked about the recent Wynn detention. There's families outside of these places too, Sandra, where, wives, husbands, spouses, and families are trying to get their family members out while they go through the removal process. I just had coffee this morning with Angela De La Valle, whose husband, Carlos, is in that Wynn facility in Louisiana. Mm-hmm. I actually found out about that death first from her. She's trying to get her husband out. Her husband has no criminal history, is not a flight risk. He has some medical conditions, and she's worried about him. And then just imagine finding out from him on a phone call that, that someone in the facility, it's not just scary for the people in there, it's scary for families who are just trying to say, hey, let us go through the process that we're going through, but, why do you have to keep my loved one in detention?
So I'm curious, since you spoke to the family member of someone who's in Wynn, did they talk exactly about what the conditions are like? Did give some examples of what they have? Are they sleeping on the floor with the Mylar blankets? What are they enduring?
Certainly. What I hear from her and from everyone who is talking directly to family members in detention, also lawyers who are going into detention, talking to their clients, is just across the board what we've seen is, poor food, poor medical, obviously we've talked about this, poor food, poor quality of food, no diversity of food, food that's rotten or spoiled, that is, in most cases wouldn't be adequate for consumption. Certainly in many of these facilities, not enough food in terms of calories. There's, women who are pregnant or nursing who have been in detention, and by the time they leave detention, they have worsened medical conditions. Some of them aren't able to even nurse because they've been effectively malnourished while inside detention. And then, of course, in places like Wynn and other facilities, just not enough beds for people sleeping on the floor, people doing what they sometimes call hot bunking, where there'll be 2 or 3 people in a bed, and you'll be able to sleep in that bed on 8-hour shifts, taking turns, because people don't even get their own bed.
We're running a little tight on time there. Right now, there's 60,311 detainees, which is a drop, but still, it's a massive number of people. I do want to plug that you are in D.C. and you are on your Substack going to have a conversation this week on Thursday with U.S. Representative Mike Levin, a Democrat from California, talking about what he saw in Otay Mesa, the detention facility, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I'm really grateful to get to have this conversation with Representative Mike Levin from Southern California, because congressional electeds are some of the only people who can really get access to these facilities. They're required to be allowed into these facilities by law. He's been into the Otay Mesa facility, a facility that has complaints just similar to all the ones we've discussed. So getting to hear from someone who's been in there and had a really close look is going to be really valuable.
So log in, go to the Substack, and find Austin. We always run out of time with you. Yeah. I know. We'll talk next time more about the Dignity Act. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, Austin. Welcome back. On Wednesday night, our parent company, Nexstar Media, is going to be hosting a much-anticipated debate with candidates running for the California gubernatorial race. 2 Republicans and 4 Democrats have qualified for the debate. This is after frontrunner Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell dropped out recently after allegations of sexual misconduct against him. Our partners at News Nation and reporter Ryan Bass have the story.
The fact that there's no clear frontrunner in this governor's race in California is what makes it so intriguing ahead of Wednesday's debate. In just the last 2 weeks, we've had Eric Swalwell's campaign go up in smoke. We've had President Trump make a surprise endorsement, which has really flipped this campaign on its head in the race to succeed term-limited Governor Gavin Newsom. Now, as for Swalwell, he is out and resigning from Congress amid multiple sexual assault and misconduct allegations. He denies any wrongdoing and hasn't been charged. A source tells The Hill the Justice Department is looking into this. And remember, he wasn't just in the race. Swalwell was leading it. Now, President Trump, he's throwing his hat in the ring to back Steve Hilton, the former Fox host and UK political advisor, over Sheriff Chad Bianco, which raised some eyebrows even among Republicans. Now, Hilton's been a familiar face on Fox for years. President Trump on Truth Social calling him a, quote, truly fine man and saying Steve Hilton has my complete and total endorsement. He will be a great governor. Now, while Trump made an endorsement, the state's GOP has yet to endorse either candidate. But Democrats here have been facing a real risk of potentially being shut out with their vote split in this top 2 system that California has in the way that they vote. President Trump backing Hilton may have actually helped Democrats here and made it tougher for those 2 Republicans to take those top 2 spots. Now, in terms of polling, Democrats are still divided here on who they want as their front runner. Candidates like Tom Steyer, you have Xavier Becerra, and then you have Katie Porter, but no one's really separating themselves from the pack here. The first poll since Swalwell dropped out has been released courtesy of our parent company Nexstar and Emerson College. It shows Steyer, Becerra, Porter, and Matt Mahan all bunched together. Mahan and Republican frontrunner Steve Hilton, they laid out their case on the Hill on Sunday.
What Democrats need is better ideas, and I'm the only Democrat in this race who has actually delivered real results in people's lives.
Why would you expect a different result if you keep voting the same way? The answer for California is not another Democrat. It's a completely new direction, and that's what I'm offering.
The last Republican to govern California was, of course, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who served from November 2003 until January 2011. The big unknown in this race, though, about 1 in 4 voters still haven't made up their mind in California. That's about 23% undecided. That is essentially the whole ballgame here for who could pull ahead in the race for California's governorship.
That was Ryan Bass reporting. You can watch that debate live on borderreport.com at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. That's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for watching.